Mercy was always described to Celeste as a noble instinct, a soft virtue granted by the strong to the weak, but that night proved mercy could be weaponized until it looked like law. A debt became a doctrine. A woman became a line item. Men who had dined at her family table spoke of honor, while calculating her exchange value down to the acre and oath clause. She had spent years believing cruelty arrived with raised voices and open hands. She learned instead that the most dangerous cruelty arrived sealed in wax, witnessed by elders, and read aloud in a careful tone while rain struck stone like applause. The servants washed her in cold water that smelled faintly of iron and lavender, as if someone had tried to perfume a wound. They scrubbed her arms until her skin went raw, combed out her hair with efficient, impersonal tugs, and draped a pale veil over her face. No one met her gaze for long. One younger maid pressed a folded cloth into Celeste's palm when the overseer looked away, then shook her head once in silent apology, as if that tiny act were all the rebellion she could afford. By the time the second bell rang from the south tower, the treaty guests had arrived, and the corridors of Ravencrest Keep hummed with muffled boots, clinking armor, and the brittle civility of powerful wolves pretending they had not come to watch a sacrifice, dressed as diplomacy. Celeste stood in an antechamber with her wrists crossed behind her back, while a clerk wound silver wire around them. The wire bit with each turn, not enough to maim, enough to remind. She tasted copper at the back of her throat where she had bitten her own tongue to stay quiet. Her uncle entered carrying a black dispatch case and did not dismiss the guards, which told her he wanted witnesses for whatever came next. Darius Ravencrest had the kind of hands people trusted on sight, broad-palmed and steady, with a signet ring that caught firelight. Those same hands had signed her life away before sunset. "You will walk when called," he said. "You will kneel at the foot of the Nightshade throne. You will speak only if the king addresses you directly. If you shame this house tonight, I will not protect you from the consequences." She stared at him through the veil. "I am the consequence." One guard flinched. Ravencrest did not. He set the case on the table, broke a seal, and withdrew a parchment she recognized instantly by the family cipher burned in dark wax. Her mother's line, Duskwalker archive script. He held it where she could see, and something in her chest tightened before he even spoke. "This confession reaches me from the inner vault," he said, voice almost conversational. "Your bloodline carries documented correspondence with separatist factions during the Ash border disputes. Treason by ancestry creates unacceptable risk under treaty integration. In practical terms, it renders you expendable, politically convenient, as council language puts it." The room seemed to tilt. "That is forged." He gave a small shrug. "Forgery is such a dramatic word. Let us call it curated history." She took one step toward him and the wire cut deeper. "You made me a debt payment because it was useful. I made a strategic concession because I intend to keep our territory intact." His gaze sharpened. "Do not confuse sentiment with governance. Nightshade required collateral with symbolic weight. You had no mate contract, no standing office, and a rumor shadow over your line. You were the cleanest option." Cleanest option. The phrase landed harder than a slap. In her mind, everything moved in jagged flashes. "I am still breathing. I am still here. If I scream now, they call it hysteria. If I beg, they call it proof. If I do nothing, I vanish." Her pulse raced so hard she could feel it in her teeth. She thought of her mother teaching her old lunar prayers by the kitchen hearth, not because either of them believed prayers bent fate, but because naming your own breath was one way to keep it. Ravencrest folded the parchment with meticulous care and slid it back into the case. "When this is over, you may yet live comfortably. The Nightshade King is rumored to be disciplined, not sadistic. Be obedient, and your transition will be painless." "Transition," she repeated. You mean transfer. He stepped closer, lowering his voice. I mean survival. Do not mistake your situation. I am offering the only version of survival available. He turned to leave, then paused at the threshold. One more thing. The council requested proof of restraint. Keep the bindings visible. The door shut behind him. Metal clicked. Locked. Celeste stood very still until the lock's vibration died in the stone. Her shoulders shook once, twice, then steadied. The younger maid's folded cloth still sat in her palm. She opened it with numb fingers and found not cloth, but a narrow brass hairpin sharpened at one end. The first cut took longer than she expected. Silver wire looked delicate and behaved like spite. She worked the pin into one loop and twisted until her wrists burned. On the third attempt, the pin snapped and sliced her thumb, hot pain blooming. She used the broken half anyway, sawing through one strand, then another, forcing herself to breathe through the sting. Outside, drums began in the courtyard. Procession cadence. She had minutes. When the final loop gave, the wire sprang loose and scored her skin in bright lines. She pulled the veil off, shoved the ruined pin into her sleeve, and crossed to the side door used by servants carrying coal. It opened to a narrow stairwell that smelled of wet stone and old ash. She ran down it half blind, one hand skimming the wall for balance, bare feet slipping on condensation. At the bottom landing, two stable boys froze at the sight of her, eyes wide. She pressed a finger to her lips. One of them jerked his chin toward the west gate. She ran. Rain hit her like thrown pebbles the moment she burst into the yard. Torches guttered. Banners snapped hard in the wind. The black flagstones leading to the treaty hall gleamed slick as glass, and the first step she took carved pain up her arch where a shard of broken obsidian caught flesh. The second step opened another cut. She kept moving. Behind her, voices rose. Stop her, gate line, now. She did not look back. The hall loomed ahead, all basalt columns and silver braziers, its doors thrown open for ceremony. Wolves crowded the threshold under cloaks and ceremonial leathers, pack colors darkened by rain. If she reached that floor before they dragged her away, Ravencrest would lose the private version of this story. He would have to lie in public. The courtyard stones felt alive under her feet, each edge a separate fire. Water streamed down her face and into her mouth. Breath tore at her lungs. She heard pursuit, close enough for boot beats to overlap hers. A hand brushed her shoulder and missed when she swerved, almost falling. Then she crossed the threshold. Sound changed first. Rain became a distant roar, replaced by the vaulted echo of 100 witnesses drawing breath. Heat from braziers rushed over her soaked skin. Resin smoke, wet wool, wolf musk, old cedar from the throne dais. She stumbled 3 paces forward, leaving diluted red crescents on polished obsidian. At the far end of the hall, beneath carved stone wolves and moon runes etched in silver, the Alpha King sat in a dark coat with a crown like night metal on his brow, Darius Nightshade. She had expected a monster from rumor, a man who wore brutality like perfume. Instead, she saw stillness so complete it unsettled her more than rage would have. He watched her with a predator's focus and a ruler's restraint, as if cataloging every cut, every tremor, every chain mark before deciding what the room deserved. Ravencrest's men seized her arms. She wrenched free on instinct, skin slipping from their grip with rain and blood, and took one more step toward the dais before her legs folded. She hit the floor at the base of the throne hard enough to rattle her teeth. The severed silver wire, still looped around one wrist, rang against stone in a thin metallic note that carried farther than it should have. Her vision narrowed to fragments. The edge of Nightshade's boots, torchlight reflected in puddles, the hem of her torn dress clinging to her knees. Somewhere behind her, Ravencrest's voice cut through the hall, smooth and urgent. Your Majesty, accept this treaty collateral as agreed. She is unstable from transport. We regret the spectacle. Celeste pushed up on shaking palms. He forged. A cough of blood and rain stole the next word. She swallowed and tried again, louder, voice rasping raw. He forged my line. He sold me to bury his crimes. Silence snapped tight across the chamber. Not empty silence. Decision silence. Nightshade rose. The movement was unhurried, almost gentle, which made every dominant in the room lower their gaze in near-perfect sequence. Power shifted without a shout, without a command. He descended the dais steps alone, stopping an arm's length away from where Celeste knelt, drenched and trembling, feet cut open on black stone, wrists marked by silver. When he spoke, his voice was low and carrying, the tone of a blade laid flat but not sheathed. "Remove your hands from her." Ravencrest's guard stepped back at once. Nightshade crouched, bringing himself level with Celeste instead of towering over her. Up close, his scent held winter cedar, storm air, and the wild metallic edge of an alpha holding himself on a very short leash. His gaze flicked to the wire biting her skin. "May I?" No one had asked her permission all night. The question struck harder than the rain ever had. Celeste nodded once because speech failed her. His fingers reached for the silver knot at her wrist, and the hall waited. The first loop resisted his touch. Silver tightened by panic and bad craftsmanship, and Darius Nightshade did not force it. He angled his hand so she could see every movement, thumb and forefinger working the wire with patient precision, while the rest of him remained motionless, as if he had anchored his own strength so she would not feel trapped beneath it. Celeste watched his hands because she could not bear to watch the faces behind him. The court pressed in on all sides, packed shoulder to shoulder in wet cloaks and formal armor, their scents layered into a dizzying tide of pine oil, rain, steel, and wolf. Somewhere near the fourth pillar, a woman began to whisper and stopped when a guard hissed her quiet. Farther back, someone shifted weight and leather creaked. Every sound struck Celeste as too loud. Every breath scraped. Ravencrest took one measured step forward from the aisle, rainwater still dripping from his collar. "Your Majesty," he said, voice smooth enough to pass for concern. "She has been under strain for days. She is prone to dramatic accusations when frightened. If you permit, I can provide the documentation in private and spare your court this confusion." Nightshade did not look up. "You may speak when I ask." The words were soft, not shouted. They cut anyway. A ripple moved through the room, not fear exactly, but recalibration, the sound of a hierarchy settling into place. Celeste had grown up around wolves who performed authority with volume and spectacle. Nightshade did it by lowering his tone until everyone had to lean toward it. The final kink in the first wire gave beneath his fingers. He peeled the loop back from her swollen wrist and set it on the floor beside him, instead of handing it to a guard, as if even that small object mattered as evidence. A thin red line circled her skin where the metal had bitten. His jaw tightened at the sight. His attention shifted to her other wrist. The second loop had twisted tighter, jagged where hurried hands had cinched it. Nightshade worked the knot loose one fraction at a time. On the last turn, the wire snapped free, and his fingertips brushed the abraded inside of her wrist. Heat struck first, blinding and immediate. Cold followed, racing down her spine like moonlight under bone. Her breath hitched hard enough to hurt. The chamber's layered scents dropped away until there was only him. Cedar split fresh, winter air before snow, iron and wild musk, and a note she had never known she was waiting for. Her pulse stumbled. So did his. Nightshade inhaled sharply. Not loud, not subtle either. Gold flared under his pupils for a heartbeat, living color, predatory and unmistakable, then banked, controlled by force. "Still with me?" he asked quietly, and only she could hear the question. She swallowed rain and blood taste. "Yes." It was not entirely true. Exhaustion had gone beyond shaking and entered the hollow place where the body became distant, where pain arrived a half-second late and the room tipped at strange angles. Her feet throbbed in separate pulses, each cut singing its own sharp note whenever she moved a toe. The hem of her dress clung cold to her legs, her hair, plastered to her face, smelled like storm water and iron. Yet she was still here, in front of witnesses. That mattered. Nightshade freed the second wrist, then sat back on his heels without touching her again. He kept one hand open, palm up, an unspoken offer she could refuse. "Can you stand, Celeste Duskwalker?" Hearing her full name in his voice cracked something brittle behind her ribs. Not collateral, not tribute. Her name. She placed her trembling hand in his and tried to rise. Her knees buckled before she reached half height. He caught her by the forearms, steady but careful, and lowered her back to the stone without a flinch of impatience. Across the hall, one of his officers stepped forward. A broad-shouldered man with a scar under his left eye and captain's braids threaded in bronze. "My king, allow the healers to take custody." Nightshade's gaze flicked up, brief and absolute. "Bring the healer to her." The captain bowed once and moved, boots ringing against obsidian. That was Celeste's first clear glimpse of Nightshade territory as more than architecture and rumor. It was not gentler than Ravencrest lands. It was disciplined. The guards at each column did not stare at her wounds the way carrion watchers studied weakness. They watched lines of sight, exits, hands near blades. 2 attendants had already laid dry cloth near the dais without crowding her. A gray-haired healer in dark green crossed the chamber with a satchel and halted outside arm's reach, waiting for permission from her, not from the king. Small things, terrifying things, because she had no practice trusting them. "I am kneeling in a foreign court with my feet cut open and my uncle lying 3 paces away, and the most dangerous man in the room just asked whether I could stand. I do not know what the right move is. If I lean into this, I could be handing him the leash myself. If I pull away, Ravencrest wins the story he wrote for me. Unstable, ungrateful, expendable. I am so tired that the torchlight blurs, but tired is not the same as beaten. Breathe in. Cedar, rain, hot resin. Breathe out. Name what is real. My wrists are free. My name was spoken. The hall is watching, and for once the watching might be useful. Do not disappear now. Do not fold back into silence because silence kept you alive before. Silence also delivered you here." The healer, a woman with weathered hands and silver thread braids, touched 2 fingers to her own throat in formal request. "Lady Celeste, may I tend your feet?" "Lady." Celeste almost laughed at the absurdity of it, a sharp, disbelieving sound trapped behind clenched teeth. She nodded. When the healer knelt, Nightshade shifted aside to make room, but he did not retreat to the throne. He remained at Celeste's level, coat dark with rain at the shoulders, crown catching firelight at the edges like a blade left near flame. His stillness changed the air around him. Predatory, yes, but leashed to purpose. Ravencrest tried again, this time pitching his voice toward the elders. "You all know treaty terms were agreed in good faith. The girl's condition reflects transport urgency, not intent. I ask that this proceed according to schedule. Delays invite misinterpretation along the border." One elder near the second brazier, a thin man with moonbone rings on every finger, murmured, "The border is already interpreting." Nightshade rose at last, turning to face the hall. Nothing proceeds according to schedule while one signatory arrives bound in silver and bleeding. His eyes swept the gathered council, then stopped on Ravencrest. "You will produce your confession document now. It will be read by my archivist and hers, in full, under witness." Ravencrest's smile thinned. "If that is your command." "It is." The tension in the chamber tightened another notch, a bowstring drawn and held. Then Nightshade looked back down at Celeste, and the room narrowed to the span between them again. The healer had finished rinsing the cuts and binding the deepest slice along her right arch. Celeste breathed through the sting, fingers gripping the edge of her torn skirt. "There is still wire residue," Nightshade said to the healer, indicating the raw groove around Celeste's left wrist. "Salt wash will worsen it. Use moon balm first." The healer blinked, surprised, then nodded. "Yes, my king." He noticed that, Celeste thought, irrationally shaken by the detail. He noticed what would hurt. As the healer reached for the balm jar, Celeste swayed. The long sprint, the blood loss, the crash after panic, all of it came down at once. Nightshade moved on instinct, one hand bracing lightly at the back of her shoulder to keep her from pitching forward. The bond already struck at her wrist surged again, harder, a second wave crashing over the first. Awareness prickled along every inch of her skin. The pull between them snapped taut, visceral and magnetic, and her body answered before thought could intervene. His eyes flashed gold. This time the flare held longer, amber bright and predatory, as his wolf surged near the surface. The captain by the pillar dropped his gaze at once. So did the elders. One by one, dominants across the hall lowered their eyes in instinctive submission to a king on the edge of an absolute choice. Celeste stared up at him, frozen in the center of the storm they had already made. A low thrum built in her chest, ancient and bewildering, and the animal part of her went rigid, then reached. Fear struck with it, jagged and old. Need followed, unbearable in its clarity. She wanted distance. She wanted to lunge closer. She wanted to rip free of every hand in this place. She wanted to put her forehead against his throat and breathe until the shaking stopped. The contradictions crashed together so violently she almost retched. No, she thought, and then, with equal force, yes. Nightshade's jaw flexed. He took half a step back, giving her space even as his gaze held hers with raw, stunned recognition. When he spoke, his voice was lower than before, roughened at the edges by effort. Celeste. Not title, not protocol. Just her name, like a vow he had not intended to say aloud in public. Ravencrest's composure cracked for the first time. "What is this?" he snapped, eyes darting between them. "What game is this?" No one answered him. Celeste could hear two heartbeats now, separate and synchronized, as if some hidden mechanism had clicked into place under her ribs. The pull between them was visceral, magnetic, frighteningly precise, and it did not ask whether she was ready. It simply existed, undeniable as gravity. Nightshade knelt again, slower this time, each motion deliberate, his hands visible, empty. Gold still burned faintly in his irises, wolf-light banked but not gone. "Look at me," he said, and she realized she already was. "You are not in chains here." The words should have sounded strategic in front of witnesses. They did not. They landed like truth spoken under threat. Celeste's fingers curled against her own palm, nails biting skin to keep hold of herself. She searched his face for calculation and found restraint stretched to breaking, fury aimed outward, and beneath both a reverence that terrified her more than hunger would have. Because hunger she understood. Reverence implied seeing. Seeing made surrender possible. Around them, the court remained utterly silent, every eye lowered or fixed elsewhere, giving their king privacy without pretending they were not all bearing witness to the same impossible fact. Mate. The recognition rang through her with the force of a bell struck in the marrow. She hated it. She needed it. She could not unmake it. Nightshade's breath shuddered once, controlled again in the next instant. "Do I have your permission?" he asked, voice barely above a murmur. "To help you stand at my side?" Celeste looked at his offered hand, then back into those gold-lit eyes, and the hall held its breath with her. Celeste set her hand in his. The contact tightened the bond line again, not with the violent shock from moments earlier, but with a deep, steady pull that felt like a tide finding its moon. She let him draw her up, and the instant her weight touched her torn feet, pain blazed hard enough to turn the hall white at the edges. Her knees gave. Darius Nightshade caught her without jolting her wounds, one arm behind her back, the other bracing beneath her knees, and paused there as if waiting for a verdict. "May I carry you?" he asked, his voice pitched for her alone. "Or do you want another way?" The question, in front of every dominant wolf in two territories, struck the room like another command. Not because of volume, because he had offered choice where everyone else expected possession. Celeste's throat worked once. "Carry me." He lifted her against his chest and rose in one smooth motion. Wet fabric chilled through to his coat, and she felt the controlled tension in him, the effort to hold strength without crushing. Across the chamber, Ravencrest started forward again. "Your Majesty, this is unnecessary theater. If she is to remain in your keeping, the treaty execution requires immediate witness from both councils." Darius did not turn his head. "Captain Ilian." The scarred officer stepped out of line. "My king." "Escort Darius Ravencrest to the east antechamber. 4 guards. No private conversations. His dispatch case goes to the archivist now." Ravencrest's expression sharpened into open anger. "You detain a signatory? I detain a man whose collateral arrived bound and bleeding." Darius's gaze finally moved, landing on Ravencrest with quiet finality. "You will have every lawful hearing. You will not have another unsupervised minute," the captain signaled. Guards closed in. Ravencrest did not resist, but his eyes locked on Celeste over Darius's shoulder, a promise of retaliation wrapped in courtly composure. She held his stare until the doors shut behind him. Darius shifted her weight slightly, careful of her ankles, and crossed the hall. Wolves bowed out of his path in a widening corridor of black stone and torchlight. No one touched them. No one spoke. Rain still hammered the high windows, but inside the palace the air smelled of warmed cedar, old parchment, and medicinal herbs from the healer wing ahead. He carried her through 3 sets of carved doors into a private treatment chamber with low lamps and shelves of clay jars. A copper basin steamed beside a narrow bed layered with clean linen. He lowered her to the mattress and crouched immediately, palms open on his own knees so she could see he would not move faster than she allowed. The chief healer entered behind them with 2 assistants. "My king, we should clean and stitch before swelling sets." Darius nodded once. "Tell me what you need first." "Boiled water, moon balm, willow tincture, and steady hands." The healer glanced at Celeste's wrists. "Also privacy from an audience." "Granted." He stood. "You two, out. Close the outer doors." The assistants hesitated, startled. "Sire, should we not remain to—" "Out." They went. The healer stayed, set out tools, and began to unwrap the field bandages from Celeste's feet. Darius poured hot water into the basin himself, then knelt beside it. When the healer reached for the cloth, he held out his hand. "Show me pressure depth and rinse order," he said. The older woman studied him for 2 beats. "You are asking to do this." "I am telling you to instruct me." She did, brisk and exact, guiding his fingers to the angle that cleaned without reopening torn edges. Then she stepped back, folding her arms. "I will monitor. If you press too deep, I take over." Celeste watched him lift her right foot into the warm water. His touch stayed precise, almost clinical, but not cold. Dirt and diluted blood clouded the basin, then cleared as he changed the water and worked again. He cleaned every cut from heel to toe, counted under his breath when she flinched, and paused each time until her breathing steadied. When his hand moved too quickly to catch a slipping cloth, she jerked hard, body bracing for impact that did not come. He stopped at once, set the cloth down, and leaned back from the bed. Look at me, he said quietly. She did, chest heaving. No sudden contact, no restraints, no closed doors you cannot open. If I fail that, you call it out and I correct. He glanced at the healer. Witness it. The healer inclined her head. Witnessed. Darius continued, voice low, practical, stripped of flourish. I will not use your body to settle politics. I will not call control protection. I will not cage you and name it care. He held her gaze through each vow. You were brought here as an object in a contract. That ends tonight. Celeste's first response was anger, bright and defensive because hope felt more dangerous. Words are easy in the first hour. Yes, he said. That is why I am giving you behaviors, not poetry. He reached up, unfastened the crown from his head, and set it on the stone floor between them. The black metal rang once against tile. Then he stepped back and sat on the far side of the bed, lower than her eye level, elbows resting on his thighs like an unarmed guard waiting outside a door. The room went very still. I do not understand this. I am trained for bargains with teeth in them, for kindness that invoices itself later. I know how to survive cruelty because cruelty is honest about wanting something. This is worse. This is a man with enough rank to take whatever he wants, lowering himself and asking permission like it costs him nothing, while every instinct I own insists nothing comes free in a court. My skin still remembers silver wire. My feet still burn. The bond under my ribs keeps pulling toward him with calm, relentless force, and I cannot tell whether that pull is salvation or another chain. I am so tired I could sleep sitting up, but if I sleep, I lose the room. If I trust, I lose leverage. If I refuse all trust, I might lose the only ally standing between me and Ravencrest. Choose, Celeste, not forever. Just this minute. Choose 1 inch of ground and hold it. She swallowed. Why? Darius's eyes stayed on her face, not her throat, not the torn hem of her dress, only her face. Because my father called coercion duty. He built a kingdom of obedient silence and named it order. I buried people I could not protect under that order. His jaw tightened. I do not repeat his methods, not even when they are convenient. The healer returned to work then, applying moonbalm to Celeste's wrists and stitching 2 deeper cuts with quick, competent movements. Darius followed instructions without crowding, passing thread, changing cloths, steadying her ankle only when she nodded. By the time the last bandage was tied, the rain had softened to a distant hiss on slate roofs. He rose, went to the inner door, and opened it himself. You can lock this from inside, he said, stepping aside so she could see the bolt and key. Food will be sent. If you want guards, I place them. If you want none, I clear the hall. You choose. Celeste looked from the open door to the crown still on the floor between them. He did not reach for it. Her fingers trembled as she leaned down, lifted the dark metal with both hands, and held it out. Darius accepted it like something breakable. Thank you, he said. He set the crown under his arm rather than on his head, bowed once, and left the chamber backward, never turning his back until he crossed the threshold. The latch clicked softly behind him. By the third dawn after the treaty night, the palace had learned her footsteps by sound. Celeste entered the open court in borrowed slate-gray wool and soft boots, wrapped with healer's tape beneath the leather. The cuts had sealed into angry lines. Each step still carried a pulse of heat, but she could stand without swaying. Sunlight poured through high lattice windows striping the obsidian floor in silver bars. Elders from both territories filled the lower tiers, their attendants clustered behind them with tablets and sealed folios. The air held ink, oiled armor, and the sharp spice of nerves. Whispers tracked her movement. Tribute Wolf, Bought Luna, Ravencrest's leash. She kept her gaze level and walked toward the right side of the dais where Darius stood in formal black, crown restored, expression unreadable. Captain Ilion flanked the stairs. At the far rail, Ravencrest sat under guard in plain guesthouse colors, no signet on his hand. An elder with moonbone rings, the same thin man who had murmured at the brazier, leaned toward his neighbor and said too loudly, "If she carries treaty marks, the council should inspect authenticity before she is granted court position." Another elder, broader and red-haired, gave a humorless nod. "Agreed. If she is to stand near the throne, let us verify what was purchased." Purchased. Celeste felt the old freeze climb her spine. Darius heard it too. She saw the shift in his shoulders, the way a predator marks a line. The moonbone elder descended 2 steps without waiting for permission and reached for her forearm, fingers already spread to turn her wrist upward for display. Darius moved once. His hand closed around the elder's wrist midair, firm enough to stop, controlled enough not to bruise. Gold edged his irises like banked fire. "Any hand laid on Celeste Duskwalker without consent," he said, "every word precise, will be judged as a strike against the crown." Silence dropped over the chamber like a gate. The elder tried to pull free and failed. "I meant no insult. Protocol requires respect for sentient persons," Darius said, "not inventory checks." He released the wrist and the elder stepped back, rubbing his arm, face gone pale beneath age spots. Murmurs broke out, then died when Captain Ilion looked up from the stair with open impatience that promised consequences for anyone testing the boundary. Darius turned to Celeste. The entire court watched, waiting to see whether he would tuck her behind the throne like a protected secret. His voice carried without strain. "You choose your place," he said. "Behind me, if you want cover. Beside me, if you want visibility. No one decides this for you." The decision hit her harder than the confrontation. Not because she lacked courage, but because choosing meant claiming ownership of what happened next, and ownership had been denied so long it felt almost illegal. The hall waited. Celeste moved to his right. Darius shifted half a pace back, making space without eclipsing her, and the message landed in every row at once. Protected, not hidden. Partnered, not displayed. The recalibration ran through the room in visible increments as elders adjusted posture, attendants lowered their eyes, and even skeptics recalculated the cost of contempt. Ravencrest gave a short, disbelieving laugh from the rail. "You dress defiance in pretty ceremony, Nightshade. She is still leverage with a pulse." Celeste turned before Darius answered. "And you are still a man who mistakes ownership for strength." Ravencrest's mouth thinned. "Strength is what survives." "Then watch carefully," she said. Darius did not speak over her. He let the words stand. Proceedings resumed, not smoothly, but honestly. Archivists read 3 forged letters into record and marked seal inconsistencies under magnified glass. The grain manifests Ravencrest had submitted were compared against warehouse tallies. 2 numbers failed. A courier captain testified that delivery routes had been altered by direct Ravencrest order 12 days before the treaty signing. Each fact settled like stone in water, widening circles that could not be called hysteria anymore. At midday recess, when the court dispersed into knots of argument, Darius remained at her side without crowding her. A page approached with water and paused, uncertain which of them to serve first. Celeste took the cup herself. The page bowed to her first. Tiny, absurd, monumental. As the chamber refilled for afternoon session, Darius leaned just close enough that only she could hear. "You can still leave the dais if this is too much." Celeste looked out over the tiers of faces that had measured, dismissed, and renamed her in a dozen ways. Then she looked at the man beside her, at the deliberate restraint that had held for 3 relentless days, at the line he had drawn and kept drawing whenever anyone tried to turn her back into an object. "I know," she said. The words came easier than she expected. Not trust fully formed, not surrender. The first lowering of armor, deliberate and chosen. She stayed beside him when the gavel struck and the court came to order again. The first witness after recess was not an elder or archivist, but a grain steward from the southern vaults, still in work leathers dusted pale at the sleeves, as if he had run from the stores straight into judgment without changing. He bowed to the dais, swallowed, and held up a wax tablet stamped with nightshade inventory marks. "We opened 6 treaty barrels at dawn," he said. 3 smelled wrong, bitter, metallic. We quarantined the lot and sent for assay. The seal on the lids carried Duskwalker Crescent over Ravencrest freight stamp. The room shifted in a low, uneasy rustle. Celeste felt every glance that landed on her and slid away. Darius Nightshade did not move from his half-step behind her right shoulder. "Name the handling chain." The steward listed names, routes, and lock transfers with the trembling precision of a man who understood that one missing detail could become a death sentence for someone below him. Captain Ilian cross-checked each point with a clerk at the lower rail. No one interrupted. When the steward finished, Darius turned to the alchemical examiner waiting beside the witness stand, a compact woman with soot-darkened fingernails and a satchel of stoppered vials. "Findings." She uncorked one vial. Even from the dais, Celeste caught the scent first, sharp and sweet in a way that made her tongue go numb. "Ashroot distillate mixed with night poppy residue," the examiner said. "Not a battlefield toxin. Slow. It causes confusion, fever, and violent disorientation if milled into flour and consumed over several days. In a crowded territory, it would look like outbreak and panic. The kind that starts food riots." A primary consideration, Celeste realized with a chill that ran deeper than fear, was not body count. It was narrative control. A poisoned city blamed on disputed treaty cargo, border mobilization under public safety, then a perfectly timed intervention by the man who had warned everyone this alliance was unstable. Ravencrest, seated under guard, folded his hands and spoke with almost bored civility. "Your Majesty, if these barrels were tampered, then we both stand as victims. I would never compromise grain routes that feed my own kin." Darius let the silence stretch. 3 weeks ago, you authorized rerouting treaty freight from River Road to Ash Pass. Why? "Flood risk." The river was dry. A thin smile touched Ravencrest's mouth. Then prudent caution offended geography. The line drew a few strained laughs from men who wanted the exchange to feel like politics and not a confession moving toward daylight. Celeste watched her uncle's eyes instead of his smile. He was not surprised by the evidence. He was measuring the room for weak joints. Then a page in courier blue sprinted in from the west corridor and dropped to one knee at the stair, breath ragged. He held up a sealed dispatch tube with both hands. Ilian took it, scanned the mark, and brought it directly to the king. Darius read once, and his stillness changed from controlled to absolute. Amber edged his irises, predator surfacing behind composure. "Read it into record," he said, handing the parchment to the court scribe. The scribe's voice shook as he obeyed. "North Granary reports attempted ignition at outer silos. 2 intruders captured, 1 dead from fall during pursuit. Surviving intruder identifies paymaster by phrase mark only, the rescuer of 2 crowns. Additional barrels recovered bearing forged Duskwalker seal. Request immediate martial support." The prevailing consensus in the chamber fractured in real time. Elders leaned toward one another. Attendants ran notes across aisles. Guards adjusted formation with hands near blades. The core tension was no longer whether Celeste was a convenient scapegoat. It was whether the man who had sold her had just tried to poison an allied capital and stage a war. Ravencrest lifted his chin. "Any prisoner can be coached to recite a phrase. Celeste turned to face him fully. You used that phrase in my father's hall after Harvest Conclave. You said if compromise failed, you would return as the rescuer of 2 crowns and make both councils thank you. For the first time that day, a crack appeared in his polished mask. Brief. Real. He had not expected she would remember the exact wording. Darius's voice cut through the chamber. Captain Ilian, transfer Ravencrest to Iron Custody. No visitors, double warding. Search every envoy quarter for duplicate seals and forged correspondence. Now you overreach, Ravencrest snapped, rising against his guards. You cage a signatory on unproven testimony while your court parades a half-trained girl as moral authority. Darius did not raise his voice. Sit. Down. Ravencrest sat. The command landed with the clean force of pack law older than any treaty. Guards closed in, iron thorn cuffs clicked over Ravencrest's wrists, and he was escorted out through the east doors with 4 spears at his back. He did not look at Darius as he passed. He looked only at Celeste, and his expression held the cold certainty of a man who believed the board still favored him. By late afternoon, rain returned in thin silver lines across the high windows, and the court had become a war room built from parchment. Tables appeared along the lower tier stacked with manifests, route maps, and seal matrices under magnifying lenses. Celeste stood at the central map while clerks moved weighted markers across border roads. Here, she said, touching Ash Pass with 2 fingers. If he rerouted grain through this cut, he controlled both delay and witness list. He could seed contaminated lots, then leak one clean convoy and claim he stopped a wider attack. Darius watched her trace the path, his attention precise, unblinking. And who receives first alarm? He does, through his own outriders. She looked up. He arrives with proof that Duskwalker marks were on every barrel, blames a bloodline he already tainted with forged treason, then offers military stabilization under his command. A strategist from Nightshade's north flank muttered, "That is not sabotage. That is succession planning." Celeste nodded once. With famine as campaign speech. The map table hummed with urgency, but under it all the bond between her and Darius thrummed like a second current, steady and disorienting. Every time he leaned closer to read a notation, she felt the draw at the base of her throat. Every time his hand reached past hers for a marker, awareness prickled along her spine. It was a multifaceted strain. Desire braided with fear, safety tangled with the memory of being traded. Evidence suggested she trusted him in action long before her mind granted permission for trust in full. When the chamber thinned for a meal break, he stepped back and asked, "Do you want quiet or company?" "Quiet," she said, then added, because the new honesty between them demanded precision, "Close enough that I can find you quickly." He inclined his head. "Done." She took her tray to the narrow balcony above the west court, where wet air carried pine and hearth smoke. Below, guards rotated in disciplined silence. She forced herself to eat 3 bites of bread and salted broth, then sat with her forearms on her knees staring at the rain. I am not built for this kind of closeness, not the clean kind that asks and waits. I know pressure. I know debt. I know how to negotiate with threats because threats have edges you can see. This is different. This is standing beside a man whose power could swallow mine whole and discovering, minute by minute, that he keeps placing it down instead. The bond keeps tightening every time he chooses restraint, and part of me wants to run from that pull because running has been my only reliable skill for years. But running from him now would deliver me straight back into Ravencrest's design. Stay with what is true. He asked. He listened. He kept his word through a room full of wolves who expected ownership. I can offer one truth in return. I am afraid, and I am still here. A soft knock sounded on the balcony arch. Healer Sarah stood there, gray braids damp from the corridor mist, holding a folded packet sealed in plain wax. A kitchen boy said this was dropped at the herb gate for you, she said. No name. Celeste broke the seal. Inside lay a single sheet in Ravencrest cipher hand, copied, not original. The lines were concise and venomously elegant. The king softens under her hand. She enters his rooms without guard. A pretty throat can unmake a strong rein. Use shame before steel. Celeste read it twice, then passed it to Darius, who had appeared behind Sarah without her hearing him approach. He scanned it, expression hardening by increments. Forged circulation draft, he said. Designed for elders who fear influence they cannot quantify. Or for allies who need permission to hate me louder, Celeste said. He folded the page once. Both. 3 days had taught her the architecture of his anger. He did not erupt. He narrowed. I can lock this court down tonight, he said. Suspend all access to you until we strip every hostile contact from the palace. And gift him the story that I am hidden because I seduced the king. She shook her head. No. We answer by moving in daylight. The resulting tension sat between necessity and vulnerability. Darius's instinct was to shield. Hers was to refuse any shield that resembled a cage. They held each other's gaze until he exhaled and gave a short nod. Then we move in daylight, he said. Under guard you choose. By the second bell after dusk, the emergency council reconvened with both territories represented, and the pressure in the chamber had gone from political to existential. North granary contamination was contained, but rumors had outrun facts. Border sentries reported militia clustering on both sides. If the treaty renewal rite at the Moon Temple did not proceed tonight under witness, commanders would treat silence as collapse and mobilize by dawn. Elder Marrow, moonbone rings clicking against the rail, spoke through clenched teeth. With sabotage active, temple protocol is unsafe. Delay until morning. A nightshade marshal answered. Morning gives panic 12 more hours to organize. Darius looked to Celeste, not as performance now, but as practice. Your assessment. She tasted metal at the back of her tongue and spoke anyway. He wants delay. Delay lets rumor harden into orders. We hold the right tonight, with full witness, and we publish the contamination findings before the final oath. Marrow glared at her. You would gamble 2 packs on your confidence. She met his glare. You already gambled 2 packs when you believed forged blood made me disposable. Darius's hand rested on the table edge, close to hers, not touching. Decision stands, he said. Temple procession in 1 hour. The route to the Moon Temple cut through the inner cedar court and down a colonnade of wet black stone where torchlight trembled in wind. Celeste walked between Darius and Captain Ilion, wrapped in a dark cloak over court wool, boots tied tight against old wounds. Guards moved ahead and behind in staggered diamonds. Overhead, clouds thinned just enough for a pale moon to stain the rain silver. Halfway down the colonnade, a runner reached Ilion with a blood-smeared custody strip. A forged transfer order bearing Nightshade's sign had triggered a coordinated strike at the east antechamber. 2 wardens were down, and Ravencrest was no longer in iron custody. Ilion passed the strip to Darius, doubled the rear guard, and drove the procession forward without breaking formation. At the temple gates, wardens in ceremonial gray presented sigils and stepped back. The sanctuary smelled of cold limestone, old incense, and the metallic tang of active runes. At its center lay the ritual circle, etched in concentric lunar script around a shallow moonwell whose surface reflected torch fire like broken glass. Something felt off, not mystical, structural. 2 ward lanterns were dark that should have been lit, and one of the east columns bore a fresh scrape at lock height where no ceremonial tool should touch stone. Distinctive. Wrong. Celeste leaned toward Ilion. That mark. Check the east lock plate. He signaled 2 guards. They peeled off, boots silent on the temple floor. The first scream came from the outer corridor. Not long after, steel rang against steel, then another shout, closer, followed by the heavy thud of a body hitting stone. Torches guttered as wind punched through a door that should have been barred. 3 figures in temple gray burst in at a run, masks half torn away, blades already out. Down! Ilyan barked. Guards met the charge in a tight clash of bodies and bronze. Darius moved in front of Celeste with brutal economy, one arm shunting her behind the inner ring, while his other hand drew a short curved blade that caught moonlight like ice. His gaze went feral, pupils shifting, alpha dominance flooding the chamber hard enough to make even allied wolves flinch. From the shattered east vestibule, Ravencrest stepped into view wearing broken cuffs and a strip of blood-dark cloth wrapped around one wrist where Ironthorn had been sawn away. Behind him came 2 councilmen Celeste recognized from treaty benches and 4 armed enforcers in unmarked leather. "I told you," Ravencrest said over the chaos, voice carrying with awful calm. "Strength is what survives." He tossed a leather folio into the circle. It landed open on the rune line, pages covered in Duskwalker genealogy and lunar script annotations in his hand. Celeste saw her mother's name, her grandmother's, her own, marked with a red sigil she had never been taught. Darius took one step toward Ravencrest. "You are done." "Not yet." Ravencrest lifted a hooked ritual blade and sliced his palm, letting blood strike the outer glyphs. The circle ignited in a rush of white-silver light that climbed waist-high and snapped shut like a cage around the moonwell. Old line, old claim. Blood answers blood. If I cannot rule by treaty, I will rule by inheritance. The runes leapt from stone to skin, racing toward Celeste's feet. The temple doors slammed behind the last guard, and every lock bar dropped at once with a thunderous sequence of iron strikes. Critical, immediate, undeniable. Ravencrest had not come to kill her in the dark. He had come to take her power in front of witnesses and call it law. Runes snapped around Celeste's boots like live wire made of moonlight, tightening in spirals that bit through leather and skin with cold so sharp it burned. Darius moved to break the line, blade up, shoulders squared, but Ravencrest drove his blooded palm against a second glyph, and the circle surged higher, a pale wall that threw Darius back a step without touching him. "Do not cross it," Ravencrest said, smiling through split skin and triumph. "The right is keyed to Duskwalker inheritance. Any other blood that enters turns the siphon lethal." Steel rang to Celeste's left as Ilyan blocked an enforcer's strike and drove him into a column. The temple filled with controlled violence, short, brutal exchanges, boots scraping on stone slick with rain tracked in from the courtyard. Guards formed a wedge around the elders, forcing them back from the active ring. No one had space for panic, yet panic moved through the chamber anyway, visible in every pair of widened eyes. Darius's gaze locked on Celeste through the light wall. Something ancient looked out through his eyes, predatory and furious, but his voice stayed exact. "Stay where you are. Keep your hands off the outer glyphs." Ravencrest laughed. "Hear him, commanding from outside the law he cannot enter." The spiral at Celeste's feet climbed her calves, then her knees. Not fire, not rope, but a draining pull that tugged at marrow and breath together. The folio Ravencrest had thrown open began to lift page by page in the updraft of magic, names inked in red flashing one after another as if the circle were reading her lineage aloud. Her mother's name glowed. Her own burned brighter, then sent a spear of pain up her spine that buckled her to one knee. Ravencrest stepped to the ring's edge and spoke in old court dialect, each syllable striking the air like a hammer blow. "By blood unclaimed and line unceded, I invoke custodial right. Yield, heir, and I will govern what you cannot." Celeste tried to answer and coughed instead, copper flooding her tongue. She braced one hand on the stone and looked up at him through the lattice of light. Behind him, Two of his council allies were already backing away from what they had helped unleash, faces gone gray. They had expected a legal spectacle. They had not expected this force. Within the next minute, the chaos narrowed into two clear fronts. Darius and Ilion held the armed breach at the outer ring. Ravencrest held the ritual center and waited for the siphon to hollow her out. Darius took down one enforcer with a shoulder check and turned back toward her, breathing hard, blade red only with reflected rune light. Celeste, listen to me. You hold position and breathe. I will break his anchor. Ravencrest sliced his palm again, feeding the circle with another line of blood. Break it then. Every cut you make outside this ring drains her faster. He looked directly at Celeste. You are useful as debt. You can be useful as conduit. The drain deepened. Her fingertips went numb. The moon well at the center shivered, its surface darkening from silver to smoked glass, and the pull in her chest shifted from pain to emptiness, as if someone had found the seam of her and started unthreading it. I am kneeling in a cage built from my own name. I can feel him counting on my fear, counting on the old training that says survive by yielding, survive by going still, survive by becoming small enough to fit whatever story power writes for me. But staying still is not neutral. Staying still is consent with prettier language. If I wait for rescue, I become the object he designed, and Darius bleeds men against a wall he cannot cross. I know this script. I know where it ends. It ends with my voice removed and my blood interpreted by someone else. Breathe. Find one true thing. My hand is mine. My name is mine. My mother taught me the old words not as prayer but as key. I am afraid. I am also furious. Fury is direction when terror wants me silent. Celeste pushed to her feet. Darius saw it and swore under his breath. Do not move deeper. She met his gaze across the ring. If I stay at the edge, he takes me anyway. Ravencrest's smile sharpened. At last, a practical thought. She ignored him. 3 paces from her, on the inner altar, a ceremonial blade lay where a fallen warden had dropped it, crescent steel with a moonbone hilt. The siphon lines jerked at her ankles each time she moved, trying to drag her back to the perimeter. She stepped through them anyway, 1 pace, then another, pain flaring white at each shift of weight. Celeste. Darius's voice went hoarse with restraint. Tell me what you are doing. Choosing. She reached the altar, seized the blade, and turned it in her grip. Ravencrest's expression altered for the first time from certainty to calculation. He had expected collapse, not intent. You do not know the command structure, he snapped. Celeste raised the blade. I know enough. She cut her palm clean across the lifeline, hissed once at the sting, and slammed her bleeding hand onto the central rune at the moonwell lip. The circle detonated in silver. Light raced outward in branching lines that leapt from carved stone to skin. For an instant, every active sigil in the chamber became visible, not only the ritual marks but oath signatures hidden under rings, cuffs, and old scar tissue, a web of promises and betrayals suspended in the air like burning script. Ravencrest staggered as a line he had concealed at his throat ignited bright red. Celeste spoke in her mother's tongue, the old lunar cadence she had repeated as a child without understanding its legal weight. Cel ara veneth, line to oath, oath to source, theft returns to hand. The siphon channel lurched, then reversed. Ravencrest screamed, not from a wound, from exposure. The pull that had been stripping Celeste hit him instead, latching onto his oath signature and locking there like a trap. Every lie he had filed under treaty seal rose into audible confession fragments around him, overlapping voices in his own tone. Reroute Ash Pass. Mark her expendable. Dose the grain slowly. Rescue both crowns. Use shame before steel. The chamber froze as the words rolled across stone. One of Ravencrest's allied councilmen fell to his knees and covered his ears. The other tried to run for the doors and slammed into bars of silver fire now sealing both exits. Celeste had not consciously cast that lock until she heard herself speak again, voice amplified by the ring. By witness law and moon accord, no one leaves until truth is heard. Flame without heat climbed the hinges, bright as forged metal. Darius looked at the burning doors, then at Celeste, and gave one sharp nod, acceptance without interference. He turned back to the remaining enforcers and disarmed the last man with a strike to the wrist that sent the blade skidding into shadow. Ravencrest lurched toward the ring's edge, hooked blade raised, trying to force his way through by momentum. Celeste spread her blooded hand, fingers shaking, and the bond line snapped tight across his chest and throat, pinning him mid-stride as if the air itself had become chain. He spat at her feet, rage finally stripping away polish. "Release this. You do not command me." "You taught me command was ownership," she said, breath ragged. "You were wrong." Darius came to her flank just outside the central glyph, shoulder aligned with hers. He did not touch her. He did not take over. His presence landed like a wall at her side. "Proceed," he said. Celeste faced the assembled councils, elders, wardens, and guards trapped with them inside the locked temple. Her voice shook once, then steadied. "Under activated truth binding, I name charges. Forgery of blood archives. Illegal transfer of a sentient person under treaty claim. Attempted mass poisoning through grain contamination. Armed breach of moon sanctuary. Coercive inheritance ritual with intent to siphon pack magic." She looked back at Ravencrest. "Answer yes or no." He bared his teeth. "This hearing is invalid." The runes on his skin flared and tightened until he gasped. Elder Marrow stepped forward despite fear, moonbone rings bright under runelight. "Answer," he said, voice thin but clear. "The binding recognizes refusal as admission." Ravencrest's eyes cut to Celeste with naked hatred. "Yes to forgery," he ground out. "Yes to transfer. The rest was strategy." "Poisoning is not strategy," Celeste said. "It is governance." The ring branded another line down his forearm. He choked on the next breath. Darius's voice dropped colder than winter stone. "Last chance for plain truth." Ravencrest laughed once, broken and bitter. "Plain truth? I sold her because she was weak." Celeste stepped closer to the edge of his restraint, blood still falling from her palm onto the central rune. "You sold me because you feared what I would become when someone finally saw me." Silence answered her. Not empty silence this time. Witness silence. Judgment forming. Marrow lifted his staff. "Councils of Nightshade and Ravencrest under moon oath, render sentence." One by one, elders spoke. "Guilty. Guilty. Guilty under exile statute." Even those who had flinched from her in court gave the same word now, faces rigid with the knowledge that the right itself had spoken. Marrow struck the stone once. "By unanimous pack law, Darius Ravencrest is stripped of rank, holdings, and claim rights, bound in Ironthorn, exiled beyond marked borders under moon oath. Return is death by law." Elian stepped in with 2 wardens carrying Ironthorn chains. Ravencrest fought when they reached him, a final desperate surge, but the truth line still held him long enough for the cuffs to close. The moment the chains locked, the runes released him and he dropped to both knees, breathing hard. No signet, no title, only a man in restraints. A warden produced his claim signet from a confiscation pouch and placed it on the altar stone before Celeste. Heavy black metal, Ravencrest Wolfcrest engraved over Duskwalker Crescent, the symbol he had used to stamp ownership onto every document that had tried to erase her. Marrow looked to her. "Keeper of the charge. Execute revocation." Celeste set the ceremonial blade down, lifted the signet in her blood-slick hand, and brought it against the altar edge with all the force left in her body. It cracked once, then split clean through the crest. The sound carried to every corner of the temple. Outside, thunder rolled over the cedar court. Inside, the silver fire on the doors guttered and went out, locks releasing in a descending sequence of iron clicks. Air moved again through the chamber, cold and real. Ravencrest stared at the broken signet at her feet as wardens hauled him upright. Darius spoke without looking away from him. "Take him to the border stones before dawn. Full witness escort. If he crosses back, law stands." Ilian bowed. "It will be done." As the guards dragged Ravencrest toward the reopened doors, he twisted once to look at Celeste, hatred spent down to disbelief. She met his gaze without flinching until he vanished into rain and torchlight, chained and nameless. Rain breathed through the shattered vestibule while wardens cleared the temple floor, collecting dropped blades into locked chests and wrapping the ritual folio in consecrated cloth so no hand could reopen it without council seal. Healer Sarah pressed a clean bandage over Celeste's palm and tied it firm, then lifted the custody strip from the floor where it had fallen during the fight and handed it to Captain Ilian for record. At the east column, 2 guards pried up the scarred lock plate Celeste had spotted. Beneath it they found a filed hinge pin and a sliver of council bronze, proof that the breach had been prepared long before tonight. When Marrow saw the metal, his face hollowed with belated understanding. Darius stood within arm's reach, blood on his sleeve that was not his own, eyes still carrying that feral amber edge. "The temple is secure," Ilian reported. "North Granaries sent second dispatch. Contaminated lots were isolated and burned under examiner witness. The captured saboteur repeated his statement under oath. We have names for the pay chain." "Enter every line into open archive," Darius said. "No sealed findings." Marrow stepped to Celeste, staff lowered. "The dispatch case from Ravencrest Keep has been opened with both archivists present. The confession against your line was fabricated from spliced records. I should have said that sooner in court." He drew a breath that shook. "I did not. I answer for that failure before moon and law." Celeste held his gaze until he stopped trying to look away. "Then answer by changing the law, not by apologizing to me in corners." "I will." The chamber thinned as elders departed under guard. The silence that remained was no longer judgment. It was aftermath, raw and trembling. The moonwell at the center had settled to clear silver again, and the runes pulsed in a slow, even rhythm that matched the pull under Celeste's ribs. She felt every beat of it. The bond had opened in violence, in public, in fear. Left unfinished, Sarah had warned, it would keep flaring at the edges and tear at both of them until one yielded or broke. Darius waited until only Sarah, Ilian, and 2 wardens remained at a respectful distance. Then he stepped into the moonwell light and unfastened the clasp at his throat, bearing the marking line kings traditionally hid beneath metal and fur. His voice was low, steady, and entirely clear. "Celeste Duskwalker, I ask your consent to claim and be claimed here, under witness, with nothing taken that is not freely given. If your answer is no, I stand down and we stabilize this another way." Fear and want moved through her together, complicated and indivisible. "I am here in my own blood with the man the world calls ruthless, and he is giving me a door he will honor if I walk through it. I can still refuse. I can still keep every wall. Yet the walls are already cracked where he knelt instead of ordering, where he asked instead of assuming, where he held a line around me and never turned that line into a cage. I feel him in my pulse now, not as command, but as presence, and I want this with a fierceness that scares me because wanting used to mean vulnerability to someone else's terms. Not tonight. Tonight I choose the terms. Tonight my voice is the law of my own skin." She crossed the final step between them and took his hand, guiding it to the beat at her throat. "Yes," she whispered. "Claim me. Let me claim you." Sarah bowed and withdrew farther, giving privacy without leaving witness. Ilian turned his back to the well and posted the wardens at the doors. Darius lifted his hand to Celeste's cheek first, thumb brushing rain-damp hair from her face, waiting until she nodded again. He bent to the junction of her neck and shoulder and placed one breath there, warm and reverent, before his teeth found skin. The bite was sharp enough to pull a cry from her, bright pain that flashed through bone and then transformed, heat flooding outward in widening circles, not consuming, anchoring. Her knees softened. His arm locked around her waist to hold her upright without constraining her. Gold and silver light rose from the mark in braided strands, climbing their joined bodies like living script. Mine. He breathed against her skin, voice shaking for the first time since she had known him. Celeste's hand fisted in his torn sleeve. Yours. The bond surged. No longer a pull but a completed circuit, and she felt what flowed through it with startling precision. His restraint like tempered steel, his old grief, his protective fury, his astonishment that she had chosen him while seeing exactly what he was. She gave back what she had hidden for years, letting it pass into him unmasked. Terror, stubbornness, hunger for dignity, the fierce, tender core she had defended by pretending she did not have one. He took it and did not flinch. She tilted his head with both hands, exposing the throat-marking line he had offered, and met his eyes. My turn. He nodded once. Always. Her bite landed at the base of his throat, careful and deliberate, and she felt the shudder run through him from jaw to spine. His breath broke on her name. The dominant force that filled rooms bowed, not in defeat, in devotion. His wolf dropped to its knees inside the bond as the second mark sealed. Silver fire rippled across his rune lines, then settled under skin like banked stars. Mine, she whispered, lips against his pulse. Yours, he answered, rough and immediate. Then, together, foreheads touching in the moonwell glow, they said the last word as if it were both verdict and vow. Mate. Light flared once more, then drew inward. The frantic edges vanished. Heartbeat to heartbeat, the bond became quiet, deep, and unmistakably settled. Darius gathered her against his chest, one hand at the back of her neck, the other spread wide over her spine, and held her while her breathing steadied. She felt his mouth brush her temple. No more bought silence, he murmured. No more chosen loneliness, she answered. By sunrise, the great hall filled again, this time for law instead of spectacle. Rain-washed light poured over obsidian and silver as scribes laid out the completed evidence chain on the lower table. Ravencrest's dispatch case and forged confession, the copied smear letters, poisoned grain assay vials sealed in wax, the custody strip, the tampered lock plate, the ritual folio now bound with 3 council seals, and the 2 broken halves of Ravencrest's signet. Nothing hidden, nothing deferred. Marrow read the moon accords aloud, voice carrying to the highest tier. No sentient person may be traded, pledged, or transferred as treaty collateral. Consent is binding in court, custom, and claim. Bloodline inheritance confers stewardship only, never ownership. He looked up, meeting Celeste's eyes before he continued. These clauses are ratified by both councils and enforced by Crown and Archive. Each elder stepped forward to press seal to parchment. No one abstained. Ilian entered from the west doors in travel-stained cloak and knelt at the dais. Sentence carried out at dawn. Darius Ravencrest was chained at the border stones under full witness and sworn to exile beyond marked lines. His name is struck from command rolls in both territories. Recorded, Darius said. Sarah approached next with a small ledger tucked under her arm. The 2 stable boys who aided Celeste have been placed in protected apprenticeship under palace law, as requested. The maid who smuggled the hairpin has chosen work in the new sanctuary house. She asked that her name stay private. We honored it. Celeste felt the knot behind her ribs loosen at last. Thank you. Then Darius turned to the assembled court and extended his hand to her, palm up, the same unforced offering he had made on the worst night of her life. Stand with me, Celeste Duskwalker, as crowned Luna of Nightshade and keeper of moon accords, by deed, by witness, and by bond. She placed her hand in his and stepped to his right. He shifted half a pace back, as he had before, letting the room see exactly what had changed and what had not. Power remained power, but it no longer required her to disappear. Marrow bowed first, then Sarah, then Ilian, fist over heart. Row by row, the court followed. When the final seal was set and the last formal oath spoken, Celeste's old foot wounds throbbed from hours on stone. Darius noticed the smallest wince, slid one arm beneath her knees and the other behind her back, and lifted her as naturally as breathing. Laughter, warm and brief, broke through the hall's solemn hush. She let herself lean into him, unashamed. He carried her down the obsidian steps and out into clean morning light, while both packs watched their rulers leave side by side, mated, law-bound, and unafraid.